IUPUI's University Writing Center, and this is video 3 in our series, Language Variation and the Center. At the center, we value every language that a writer brings into their writing, and we hold true that every language is valuable. In the previous 2 videos, we talked about how all languages are equal from a linguistic perspective, and how all languages naturally vary within themselves. In this video, we'll take a look at language prejudice and the implications it has in society and the work that we do at the Writing Center. So to begin, let's define language prejudice. Language prejudice is a negative perception about an individual because of the language they speak. To put that another way, it's thinking poorly of a language, so thinking poorly of the person speaking the language. This can really come about for one of 2 reasons, or oftentimes it's a combination of the 2 reasons. First, language prejudice can come about because of a misunderstanding of what's natural in language. That is, thinking that a specific dialect or language is a misuse of proper language, or that it is less effective at communication. And a look into our previous 2 videos and into the nature of language shows us that this just is not true. Second, language prejudice can come about because of negative perceptions about a people group. This is generally more widespread and more ingrained in a society than the first reason, so it's a little bit harder to see. But when a society has negative perceptions and holds prejudices against a specific group, then anything associated with that group, including their language, is also subject to the same negative perceptions. To illustrate this, think about the media. When an individual is a speaker of British English, they're often labeled as being classy or attractive in media. Whereas if an individual is a speaker of African American vernacular English, they're often labeled as being a poor communicator. And this is representative of the views that society generally holds towards these people groups. However, as we've seen before, it's not actually because one of these people is a poor communicator. It's simply because of negative perceptions towards them. As you can imagine, this has a lot of negative implications in society, and we'll look into those in just a minute. But first, let's take a look at standard English. In the first 2 videos, we discussed how it's impossible to create a true standard of a language since languages are always changing, are arbitrary, and are made up of so many different dialects. So language prejudice answers the question of where these standards come from, because in a society, the people group who hold the most power are able to impose a certain dialect as standard based on their own prejudices and preferences. For example, in America, the language that's considered standard is the language that's often spoken by the middle and upper class white Americans. And as you can imagine, this has a lot of negative implications in society. So let's talk about those now. First, since it's simply a part of a wider prejudice, language prejudice perpetuates those negative perceptions about people groups and ends up doing further harm in society. Second, language prejudice has real-life, day-to-day negative implications for speakers of those so-called non-standard dialects. These implications include being called less intelligent, being graded harsher in school and unfairly, and being offered less jobs and job interviews. Third, language prejudice perpetuates the idea that certain languages are incapable of being professional and being academic. And this leads to certain people's works being devalued simply because of the language they are written in, despite necessarily being really incredible works. As you can see, language prejudice has a lot of negative implications in society. And at the Writing Center, we recognize this, and we do our best to lessen its effects through our programming and interactions with writers. We also encourage writers to write in whichever language they're most comfortable, and to draw upon their knowledge of multiple languages as they write. If you're interested in learning more about language, make sure you're on the lookout for our 4th and final video in this series, What is Code Meshing? And look in our resource guide in the description below. Thanks for watching.